Well, as we shift gears here, I'd like to talk about right now and turn our attention on preparation. What does it take to prepare for any given task or anything that you're planning? Because without preparation, you've got no idea where you're going to end up. If you prepare for a particular task, a particular lesson, you have some in that preparation, you're lining things up, you're getting things identified. And preparing for a certain task, you go through and you learn certain expertise, I guess you'd want to say, or certain things that will allow you to be successful. And that's what I want to talk about at that point is preparation. But before we do that, I want to highlight a couple of areas here at pjnet.tv where we are blessed with guests. They're bringing some of their expertise when it comes to writing or bringing a story. And I'd like to focus on two individuals that we have regularly, and they bring a perspective to the animals, insects, bees. And I like to focus on our first one. We affectionately call him the Honey Man, and that's our a good friend Ben Cooper, who is a beekeeper, but he's very knowledgeable on many of the other insects and brings a teaching to us and giving us a great flavor on God's perfection, how God's creation just shines through, and there's so much we can learn by just looking at God's beautiful creation. Also, our rancher at the Cross W Ranch, J.D. Wininger, brings a perspective from the cattle thought, and as he is a cattle rancher and he raises them, and he brings to us many times at pjnet.tv or in his blog regarding lessons, how God speaks to JD regarding what he might be seeing out on the ranch or out in the field, and how God brings a teaching to JD, who shares with us on how the perfectness of God and how things work together perfectly in God's economy and God's living creatures. And these two gentlemen bring a teaching and an enlightenment on how God has spoken to their heart, and they share that with us. So I'd like to talk a bit about, we see from nature the honey and the bees. We see cattle, and I have a perspective too. When I was growing up, we didn't have a big spread ranch like J.D. Wininger, but we had about 5 or 6 acres of land, and we raised animals on those 5, 6 acres. And I can concur that there's so much to learn, and we see God's glory in those animals. Now, we raised a variety. We had ducks and we had chickens, and in fact, one year, only one year, we actually raised a pig and harvested that at the end of a season. But our main, my brother and I, we were really the animal that we drew close to and that we raised were goats, and we went through the process of obviously caring for them, feeding them, and there when they're giving birth, and milking the goats, and getting some milk, obviously, and is actually seeing and raising them. We also, one of the things that I enjoyed a lot is in the summertime we would go to fairs and show these goats, and we did quite well. A lot of first place, a lot of grand prize trophies, and we that was an enjoyable time stretch. We also were part of the 4-H club, and there was a lot to learn, and that was a great organization, and they helped in so many ways. And I can think of one instance where, when it came to public speaking, at a very young age, probably I must have been 10, maybe 9, 10, or 11, that age group, we would, because we raised goats, I basically drew a large, or kind of traced it, the shape of a goat, and put some coloring in, and it was a goat on a blackboard. And what many of us did is we would have a demonstration where we would talk regarding the animal and the frame of the animal, and what the hooves and everything that made up that particular animal, and discussed the makeup of the goat, and what were the physical attributes of the goat, and talk about those. And it was a great learning experience, because we had there must have been 3 or 4 judges that would be listening to our talk, and that they would give critiques at the end. And it was very informative. It's funny how we can get stuck on certain words that they're a filler almost. You probably hear it, and I know I was one of my things that they said, you say this a lot and you don't really hear it yourself, and many people do that. They throw a word in, that seems to be a word that's a throw-in word, that if you want to hesitate, or there's a break in what you want to say, you might throw that in. I know I find I do that. When I get talking fast, I might add that. And that was very noticeable, because what it did is it brought my attention to listen, to be conscious of that, and to help when you're bringing a talk that you want to be more specific, and not have those halting points or those fill-ins. So great. 4-H was a great group and I learned a lot. So you might ask, well, how did you get on this in talking about animals? Well, I'd like to focus on someone else that will take a look in God's Word. In fact, we talked about we talked about him a couple 3 weeks ago, and he was chosen king. Samuel was looking for a king in Jesse's household, and as we had talked, that Jesse brought all his sons, or brought one son after another, and Samuel thought, yes, look at this guy, this must be the one. And God said, no, this is not the one. And God said, man looks on the outward, as Samuel was doing, but God looks at the heart. And so it came right down to Jesse's last son, and he wasn't even there amongst the group, because he was out in the field tending the sheep. And that's what I want to talk about and I want to bring it back to preparation. You know, where can we get ourselves prepared? We hear a lot about being prepared for a task, or we may even hear being prayed up, and being when we're moving forward with God, and God has called us to do something, and we want to be accomplished. We want to be prepared, and that's what I want to focus on when it comes to David. Now, David came, as we talked a few weeks ago, David came before Samuel, and God said, this, anoint David. He is going to be the king. And that's what happens. Now, after that, we see David is informed that there's a problem. There's a Philistine issue, and primarily they were raising havoc because they had the giant. They had the one that was raising havoc with the Israelites. And David heard that, and he had a lot to say, and he was talking with Saul regarding this issue. And that brings us to the book of 1 Samuel. That's 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to start with verse 33. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. So now we see, David was talking to Saul and saying, let me go, I will fight this Philistine. And Saul steps back, almost in the same situation as Samuel, looking at this he's only a youngster, and he's going to go against this seasoned man of war, Goliath. And again, Saul was looking at the outward, but God was looking at something else. He was looking at what had been taking place. He had been looking at what preparation had been accumulated in David's young life. And David responds, and we'll get an inkling here now of what some of that preparation was. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 to 37. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when the lions or the bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. So now we see David coming before Saul in boldness, realizing that he had been up against death and to save his sheep. And he knew warfare. He knew how to stand up and protect his flock. And what David saw was this was just another like an animal, and David knew the Lord of Lords. David knew God would guide, would deliver this Philistine into his hand. So, preparation. What was the preparation? Being out in the fields, tending his sheep, watching over his sheep, protecting his sheep. Not only that, but he had time on those days, maybe on the hillside, but he had a harp, and he became accomplished with that harp. In fact, that was used to Saul was troubled many times, troubling spirit, and he couldn't sleep, and he was agitated, and David would be called to come in and play that harp for Saul, and that would calm him and soothe him. So we see things of preparation that David was making out there at a young age, preparing for this time frame that Saul had been, Saul didn't call him, but Saul had a dilemma, and the Israelites had a dilemma with the Philistines and this giant. And there was a preparation that had been taking place over years as David cared for his sheep and protected his sheep and put himself in harm's way to protect those sheep. And preparation. And that preparation brought confidence. And he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of Goliath. He knew how to protect Israel. He knew how to come against this enemy of the Israelites. And as we know, he came forward and he dropped and fell that giant and took his head. But it was that preparation. And I think about what we learn in our lives, the preparations that we may have gone through. I know as I was mentioning, as a young boy being raised there in that small little farm there in Massachusetts. But there was seeing God's provision, knowing that looking at God's animals and saying, this isn't happenstance, that this is a creation, actually watching a birth of an animal and looking at the instincts of the mother automatically, immediately caring for that kid, and that the baby kid within a matter of 15-20 minutes up on its feet and ready to move. And we see in the wild God's protection, not to have a baby born and just laying there for predators, but God's unique way of protecting animals and his perfect way, getting them up, getting them protected, and we see that circle of life, not happenstance. And when you look at those things, you know that there is a heavenly creator that has made this world and has furnished this world with the animals, the insects, the flowers, and the beauty that we see when we look around at God's creation. And you know this was not happenstance. So, preparation. And that preparation, as we saw with David out in the field protecting his sheep, but there's other protection. There's this other preparation. Preparation of being in God's Word, asking God to open up His Word and to speak to you, that so that you can take in what God wants you to learn, wants you to know about Him, wants you to know about that person that you may come in contact with, and to have a sensitivity to God as He leads us. And we get that preparation by opening His Word. We get that preparation by spending time praying and worshiping God. You know, if you can't hold a tune, you can sing within your mind the praises of God, and knowing that He is the one that enables you. And we pray and ask God to be our enabler, to help us, to enable us to go forward and to share, or to bring a word of encouragement, or to bring just to be a friend to someone, and show God's love to that one. That preparation, and it comes with spending time with the Lord, as David did out in that field, watching over his sheep, and mastering that harp, and communing with God, talking with the Lord. That preparation. So I ask at this point, for you to consider: are you taking that time? Are you preparing your heart on a daily basis to move forward as God would have you during the day? And taking that time is opening His Word, spending some time in fellowship with God. And again, in this hustle and bustle world, we can get caught up in that hustle and bustle. That's when we need to stop and say, Lord, I didn't spend that time with you, and reverse course, ask forgiveness, ask help to take those interruptions and those things that would sidetrack us, and again, be consistent and focused on God to be prepared for that day. And again, that preparation, as we start our day, we want to have that preparation and be prepared for what God has for us for that particular day. So as we saw David and as a young, youthful person out in the field, and the skills and being prepared to lead his people, to be prepared to protect Israel, and to stand for Israel against the Philistines. We see that preparation that had been molded, God had been molding in that young life of David. We can take heart there, knowing that we can spend time with God. We can open up and let God speak to us, and be prepared for what He has for us each and every day. And that's my perspective and comments.